Hi guys, my name is Andrea and welcome to the terminology section of the page. I am here with JR, one of the top contributors from jrwins.com. So JR, let's get right into it for the people who want to familiarize themselves with how the betting terms go and the amounts. The first one is a nickel. What is a nickel?
Great question. When people first enter into the arena, they want to at least sound like they know what they're talking about. They would like to know the different ways that they can talk about, a slang, if you will, of the terms. And the best way to familiarize themselves would be getting right into the amounts. Great question. So a nickel refers to $500. So anybody that's betting a nickel on a game would mean that they're betting 500, which would also mean that they're normally betting 550 to win 500. We'll get into that section in a minute too with juice. A dime is 1,000. A dollar is 100. So anything in between, if they say I'm betting $3 on the game, that doesn't mean they're betting 3 George Washingtons. That means that they're betting 300 on the game. And then you got 50 cents. 50 cents would be a $50 wager, and 25 cents would refer to only a $25 wager.
What is an ATS?
ATS would refer to against the spread. In other words, every game gets a spread, and I know that's one of the other questions you're going to get into. So when you have a spread on a game, that means that the odds maker decided to make a certain team a favorite or an underdog on a particular game. So let's say, just hypothetically, you have the Bills taking on the Jets. And the Bills are the favorite because they're at home. Let's say that the odds makers believe that they're going to win the game by 3 points or more. So they'll make the Bills -3, and anybody making a bet on that game, let's say they like the favorite, okay, they would be a chalk player. They're looking to lay the wood, or that's all different terms about using a favorite. So they would use the Bills -3, meaning if the Bills win by only 2, you lose your bet. If the Bills win by 3, you don't win, you don't lose. And if the Bills win by 4 or more, you win your bet and you take home the money. So that's how it works.
Okay, and how would a straight up work?
A straight up wager would refer to just making a bet on one team. So you're not putting teams together. You don't need more than one team to win. You're just making one straight wager. So if, again, going back to Bills against the Jets, if you took the Bills -3, that's a straight wager on that game, and that's the only thing you're cheering for. If the Bills win, great. That's the only thing you need to come in. You don't need a parlay. In other words, you can also bet the total on a game, the over-under, okay, meaning how many points are scored between the two teams, and now you would need to hit the game and the total in order to win your parlay. So a straight wager means you're just making the one bet, and that's the only thing that has to win or lose.
And how would a covering go about?
Covering is, again, same thing as when we talked about a spread. So when the odds makers make the spread, and it's funny because we'll get into this on other parts of the website as well. When an odds maker makes a line, it's not necessarily that they think a certain team is going to win by that spread. It's because they're trying to drag action in on both sides of the game from the general public so that they can collect, and we're going to get into this, their VIG. Okay, they charge a VIG or juice money on every single game. So if you want to take the favorite, you would be laying 110 to win 100. Or the underdog, you would be taking points but still laying 110 to win 100. So every time you lose, you're losing 110. But every time you win, you're only winning 100. So if you lose 10 bets, it's really like you lost 11 bets. So, and that's how people are always behind with the books. They're always chasing because there's always a percentage working against them.
Right. And how would you say buying points works?
Buying points is when you now look at a game and you say, okay, let's say the Bills were playing the Jets and the line was only 2.5. And you want to use the underdog, but you don't want to take it 2.5. You want to get it at 3. So you can buy a half a point up to 3. So you would pay more juice, okay, to do that, and you would lay more to make the same wager. So again, going back to a simple unit like $100, it can go as high as -135 to get that half a point because it started at +2.5, and buying on and off of the number 3, they charge almost 25 cents more juice. Now, if you were going from 4 to 4.5 or 4.5 to 5, it would only cost you 10 cents. Under normal circumstances, we're talking. And of course, there's a lot of times where the books, they won't even move the spread on the game before they move the juice on the game because of a spread like 3 or 7. They don't want to come off of it. So rather than pushing it up to 3.5 if the public is betting, let's say on the favorite, they'll make it -3, -115, rather than -3, -110.
Ooh, okay. And what is a prop bet?
Prop bet, great question. This is where you're betting on something happening, let's say within a particular game, or in some cases you're making and this is another term, a futures bet on what might happen in the future of the season or of a series. But what most people are familiar with prop bets is the Super Bowl. That's where it, of course, made its big name, and that's because there's literally over 1,000 bets that you can make on just the Super Bowl alone. I mean, you can literally bet whether or not the coin toss is going to be heads or tails. I mean, and you're paying juice on that, of course, even though it's a 50-50 shot. So, I mean, there's always going to be a million ways to make a bet on any game, but the way I like to take advantage of that particular market is betting the futures bets. So at the beginning of every season, there's going to be odds on a particular team to go all the way and win the Super Bowl. Whether you're using the New England Patriots, who may only be 4-1 or 5-1, or if you're picking a team like the Raiders, who may be 80-1. Okay, and a guy like me looks for the value in some of these teams that are 40-1, 60-1, 80-1, where in a lot of cases they make a good run, and by week number 15 they're already 12-4 after their bye, or 12-2 rather after their bye. And now, let's face it, where everybody thought they were going to have a terrible season, now here's a team with only 2 losses and is almost a favorite to go all the way. So they went from 80-1 all the way down to maybe 8-1. So you've got all that money in between where there are people literally willing to buy that ticket from you, maybe for 40-1 or maybe 30 or 20. And there's so much money that you can sell that ticket for. And that's where, again, a guy like me will come in and we're going to buy 10, 12 teams that we think have huge value and some hedge bets in there. And we'll talk about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much for describing that. And furthermore, how would you describe a pick 'em or pick?
Well, that refers to a spread on a game. So if they put it out and let's say, again, go back Jets and Bills, just to make it simple, and the line is pick or pick 'em. That means that there's no spread on the game. Whoever wins is the winner. So if you take the Bills and the Bills lose the game by 1 or 100, you lose. If you take the Bills and they win by even just 1 point, you win. The only way to push that game is if it ends in a tie.
Oh, wow. Okay. And JR, I know a lot of people refer to you as a sports handicapper. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. How would you describe that to the people who don't really know what that means?
And that's a great question because a lot of times I'm approached when I'm out in public and, even when I'm with my wife and people will ask, hey, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I'm a sports handicapper. And I've been hit with 1,000 different things that they may think that means. But sports handicapper means that I make a living betting on games. In other words, I look at all the numbers, all the matchups. More than anything, I study the point spread. I look at where it started. I look for all the money coming in and out on it. And I look for what you're going to ask me about in a minute, and that's the sharp money or the institutional bets that are coming in on a game. And this is where a guy like me, who's been doing this as long as I have, has a much better edge than anyone trying to figure it out on their own, just because of all the resources we have, all the money that we spend on just incredible information that the layman is never going to get their hands on.
Now, and you mentioned sharp money, correct?
Yes.
How would you describe that as well?
Sharp money is what was one day back in, before the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s, everyone referred to it as wise guy money. Mm-hmm. And then, it got less taboo to be betting on sports, so they started calling it sharp money. And then all of a sudden, nowadays, I refer to it as institutional money. Mm-hmm. And institutional money is basically these large chunk bets that come in on games where it used to be hidden and disguised. The sharps used to like to hire people to run out there. If they wanted to bet 2 or 3 or 500,000 on a game, they would have to hire 50, 75, 100 people literally just to go in and bet small amounts, 2,000, 3,000 at all the different books throughout Las Vegas and online, and of course even with local books. And this is how they would get in their big action, and there's a lot of trust there as well and a lot of payoff. Even in times when you win or lose, for people to go do the job for you. And they made it easier when they decided to introduce hedge fund betting where, these guys can literally set up and they can make their bets now in large chunks in one shot, all on these electronic sports betting platforms. So, a guy like me, if you know the right place to look, you can see these big bets coming in and sometimes going out on any particular team, again, which makes my decision that much sharper.
Right. And you did mention juice and vig. How would you break that down?
Well, again, every game starts off with pretty much in football a 10-cent juice line. So, in other words, for every dollar you bet, you're going to pay 10 cents or 10% more for that bet. So, regardless if you're taking the underdog or the favorite, they're going to charge you a fee, if you will, just for placing the wager. And that's how the book guarantees themselves money. If a bookmaker can get $50,000 on one side, the Jets, and another $50,000 on the Bills on the other side, well, no matter who wins or loses, the book makes $5,000. They're going to make their 10%, no matter what. And as a sports bettor, you have to consider these odds because now you don't have to hit 50% to break even. You have to hit well over 54, 55, 56% in order just to break even, depending on how many games you're betting throughout the duration of your season. So, I mean, these are all pieces that you have to take into consideration before pulling the trigger and deciding this is going to be the game that I'm going to put my hard-earned money on.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I do want to thank you for coming by and explaining all the terminology to us. And for those of you who are watching, thank you for coming onto the site. And I hope you guys learned from this section.